Hi, everybody. We're going to start. I'm so excited to see you all. I think that it's really the best way to start the week. No better way to start a Monday morning than learning about Eretz Yisrael or topics connected to it. I know I look forward every week for it. I mean, it's not my Monday morning, but it still is Monday for me too. So I'm really, really excited to be here. And today we're going to be talking about a topic that I've wanted to know for years. And I said, okay, Adele, here's the opportunity, research it so you could give it over to people. I know I'm being very vague. We're going to see in a minute what it is. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. So I see two people on video. Obviously, it could be whoever you want. I always appreciate video because then it makes me feel like I'm talking more to real people. But again, it's totally up to you. I just know I always appreciate video. Okay, so let me share my screen. I want you to take a look at the three people that you see pictured here. We have Mozart, Picasso, and Michael Phelps. So Mozart, a lot of us are familiar with hearing that he, from the age of 5, was writing his own music. He was a child prodigy. He was so talented. Picasso, the story is told about him that he could draw before he could talk, and he's very, very famous. Michael Phelps also started swimming from a very young age, when he was 7, and at 10 he was already winning competitions. And I remember when he was participating in the Olympics, they always would like analyze his body and show how he's built like a fish, the way his arms are long and his legs. And all of these people, I'd say something that they have in common is, what just happened? Something that they have in common is that they're all destined for greatness from a young age. It was really, really clear. Now, I want you guys to look at the person on the right, David Ben Gurion, who was the first prime minister of Israel, one of the most famous people in Israel, in at least Israeli history. And I want you guys to look at the picture of the guy on the left. Now, the guy on the left is David Ben Gurion, who is younger, except unlike Mozart, Picasso, and Michael Phelps, there was nothing remarkable about Ben Gurion's childhood. He was born in a town in Poland called Plansk, and he wasn't from a rabbinic family. A lot of times you always have these stories about these like people that become great, that they were geniuses, and they came from a long line of rabbis. He wasn't from a rabbinic family. His family wasn't particularly well off. He was a very sickly person. His whole life, he would get sick a lot, especially as a child, and he would always need medical attention. He didn't have an extra good memory. His mom actually died when he was 11, and he wrote in his diary that how hard it was for him. And the reason why his mom died is she was giving birth to her 11th child. She died in childbirth. Out of her 11 children, only 5 of them survived, one of them being David Ben Gurion. And there's nothing about him growing up that would make someone say, look at that guy. He's destined to be politics. He's going to be a president. No connection, really. Now, I want you guys now to look at this picture of Ben Gurion Airport. When I found it, I got mixed feelings because I like, thank God I live here, so I don't need to be at the airport, although I do spend a significant amount of time at the airport, either visiting people or greeting groups. And the fact that the airport is named after him means, and the fact that the airport's always in the news, are flights flying, is it out flying, is it not flying, you see an out picture in there, shows how much his name is constantly mentioned. Every time you come to Israel, you land at Ben Gurion Airport, which means that you mention his name. What time are we landing at Ben Gurion? What time are we taking off from Ben Gurion? So what is it about him that his name is mentioned all the time on the news, in history, on TV, by us? Now, what I want to focus on in today's class is Ben Gurion as the first prime minister of Israel, especially when the country is being formed, had to make a lot of tough decisions. So what I want to focus on is how did he make his tough decisions, and what are some of his decisions which shape Israeli policy today? A lot of things that we do actually were put in place by him. I was surprised when I heard them, and I think you guys will find this to be really, really cool. Okay. Now, I think there's a few factors which contributed to Ben Gurion's ability to make really tough decisions. The first one I'm going to say is his sense of history and identity. In the Mishnah Pirkei Avot, one of the Mishnayot says, "Da me'ayin bata." Person should know where they came from. When Ben Gurion was in Poland growing up, there were rumors that Theodore Herzl was going to come and visit his town. Now, the rumors, well, it was a rumor. Herzl didn't end up coming. However, Ben Gurion saw a picture of him, and he learned about him and read some of his works, and he was so inspired by him. He thought Herzl was the greatest man that ever lived. And when Herzl died, Ben Gurion wrote in his diary that he felt like his life was full of darkness now, that all the light was gone in his world. And I want to share this with you. This is in a letter he wrote to his friend after Herzl died. You could read it in the English or in the Hebrew. I'm going to read it in the English. So he writes about Herzl: a terrific man like this will not come about again. A person who combines the strength of a Maccabee with the plotting of David, was the bravery of Rabbi Akiva and humility of Hillel. I forgot to highlight Hillel. The beauty of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi and the fierce love of Rabbi Yehuda HaLevi. Only once in thousands of years can a person of such wonder be born. Now, when I read this, what jumps out at me is the amount of people in Jewish history that Ben Gurion mentions. The Maccabees and David HaMelech and Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi and Hillel and Rabbi Yehuda HaLevi. For a person to be able to mention that many people in history, one, means you need to know a lot of history. And we see from a simple letter that he wrote to his friend the incredible sense of identity in Jewish history that Ben Gurion had. And the fact that he knew his history, it makes his words so powerful. And look at all these words he's using to mourn Theodore Herzl, how connected he was. And the irony, I love the best line is the line at the bottom. Only once in thousands of years can a person of such wonder be born. Little did he know then that he would be one of those people born once in 1,000 years that combines all of these strengths, and that we're going to see as we follow along. Now, Ben Gurion decided to continue in the ideas of Theodore Herzl, and when he was 20 years old, he made Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael. Now, I will tell you that his father, because his mother had died already, was not happy, because the parents then, even though they were Zionistic, and Zionism was really beginning to gain traction back then, no one wanted the kids to move to Israel. They wanted the kids to be doctors, lawyers, students, but to stay home, not to move to Israel. So he did not get a congratulations, son, I'm so happy for you. And I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about the difference between making Aliyah then and now. So pictured it on the bottom right of the screen is a Nefesh B'Nefesh Aliyah flight. So it wasn't my specific flight, but I did make Aliyah on a flight like that, where every single person on the plane made Aliyah. It was definitely the best flight I ever took of my life. You could just imagine the excitement that everyone knows that they're about to move to Israel. And I remember when we were on, I'd say the last 10 minutes, when we were ready, even before we could start spotting Israel, all of a sudden everyone's singing all Hebrew songs. It was just, I could really cry just thinking about it. It was, wow, what an experience. Now, I want to also let you know other secrets of Aliyah. You actually get paid to make Aliyah. Before they get paid, the flight is free. When you land in the airport, they hand you cash. You get paid. I'm going now into my 4th year. Every month, I still get money just deposited in my bank account. The first year, it's more, and then it gets less and less, which is supposed to be used towards rent. But of course, you could use it to whatever you want. You get something. If you don't have a bachelor's degree, you can get it for free. If you do, you can get a master's degree for free. You could get money towards something they call vocational training. If you need to get a new job, you get discounts on your taxes for rent and a whole bunch of things. And they really, really want to encourage people to make Aliyah. Back then, they made Aliyah by ship, not by airplane. And the country they were coming to was definitely not a country that was paying them. And it was not a built-up, beautiful, modern country. Modernization had not yet hit Israel. It was under the rule of the Turks. And that was also part of the reason why people didn't want to move. Now we moved to Israel, we're moving to an established built-up country. Then they would move, and they weren't really moving to anything. So that's even more of a reason why it's harder. And Ben Gurion writes in his diary that the happiest day of his life was the day he moved to Israel. And that the first night he moved, I also remember my first night in Israel. He said he couldn't sleep because he said, who could sleep the first night there in Israel? It's impossible to sleep. So he makes Aliyah. Now, there were a few things that he really, really dealt with in the beginning years of his Aliyah, not only him, that everyone dealt with. One was malaria, and the second one was hunger. And he writes in his diary that he was such an expert at getting malaria that he knew exactly when it was coming because he already knew the symptoms. He'd feel cold, he'd feel hot, cold. And he said he was constantly hungry. Hungry, like, thank God I don't know what that is. I get hungry, but not starving. He said he'd be lucky if he'd get 1 pita bread a day. And then he'd be able to slowly, he made Aliyah in 1906. He'd be able to, he'd take bite by bite, and at night the hunger would get worse, and he would try not to focus on it and put his mind on something else. And that was what he dealt with. And during the day, he worked the fields, and that's what a lot of people did when they moved to Israel. And this was the status of everybody. So now picture, first prime minister of Israel, he wasn't that then, but he's starving in the streets. Literally, there was no food. And he even writes that everyone got malaria, and people that didn't get malaria, they were embarrassed. Malaria is basically a very strong fever. They were embarrassed because, what do you mean? How do you go to Israel and not get Israeli malaria? And I want you to notice that the picture I chose on the right with the guy with no food on his plate, he's smiling because even though Ben Gurion had no food and was sick all the time, and I also mentioned that he was a sickly person as a kid, even as an adult, he says that he would take a shower in the morning during this time period and his hair would start falling out. And even though he was dealing with all this, he said, I had a smile on my face. I was so happy because I was in Eretz Yisrael. And he would write home to his dad, Dad, everything is great. I'm doing amazing. And his dad at some point learned the truth of his son's situation because someone wrote to him and said, hey, your son is starving. And he sent Ben Gurion an envelope with money in it. And he sent the envelope back. He said, Dad, I don't need it. So that was his beginnings in Eretz Yisrael, everyone's beginnings. And now I want to jump to something else which took place later. So this 40-minute Zoom, it's not I'm talking about his life, but it's not sequential. I'm not saying he was born here and then he did that and did that. I'm really focusing on issues that helped him connected to decision making. So this is an important, this is also a good point of history. We're jumping out a bunch of years. Most people are familiar with with the UN's partition plan, but there was actually a plan to divide Israel before that. In 1937, so 1936 to 1939, in Israel, there were riots. The Arabs were rioting against the British. So the British decided, you know what? We need to send a commission to Israel because we need them to investigate why the Arabs are rioting. I mean, it's probably logical reasons, so let's investigate. And the commission, it was called the Peel Commission. Now, what the Peel Commission decided is, you know what? It's not going to work to share Israel. Let's divide Israel. Now, I want you to look at how it's divided. The pink is all Arab, and the orange is Jewish, and then the green is international. The Arabs got a significantly bigger portion. Now, of course, the Arabs said no, and most of the Jews said no to this plan. Also, they said, are you kidding me? How could we defend a state like this? We can't do something like this. And Ben Gurion, he actually accepted it because he said, look, let's take what we could get, and then we'll get more, but let's at least start with something. But what I think is remarkable, and the reason why I'm bringing up this Peel Commission, which is a nice bit of history to know, is because when Ben Gurion is presenting in front of them, one of the things he said, he goes, yes, you know, we got the Balfour Declaration in 1917 and the British mandate, and you're recognizing the Jewish state in the land of Israel, but we don't really need your mandate. Because why? Because he says, "Hatanach wa mandat shalanu." The Tanakh is our mandate. And can you imagine? He's one of the, he wasn't the prime minister, but he's leader, and he's pulling out a Tanakh and saying, this is our right to Eretz Yisrael. We don't need anything else. Imagine today that's how our leaders acted. And it was just so clear to him. He goes, what do you mean? We don't need you to give us Israel. The Tanakh already gave it to us. And the fact that he's so confident and strong in who he is, and yes, it's clear, it's in the Tanakh. Yes, he's right. And I just appreciate so much how it was so clear to him. The Tanakh gave us Israel, so it belongs to us. What further do you need to look? And a lot of times people today, so they look at the state of Israel, and it's kind of, the Jewish people are pretty much, they're divided. So we have religious people, the non-religious people, and then they say, oh, well, you don't need to be religious because after all, the state was founded by non-religious people. Yes, except non-religious Ben Gurion time, non-religious people that knew the whole Tanakh and they knew who their identity was. And I'd say the non-religious people today, I don't know, I mean, I hope that their identity is as strong as Ben Gurion's was, but I don't know that this generation had what they had, and I think it's really just beautiful. So I had to share how proud he was of his identity, and because he knew that, it was just so clear to him to say, yeah, and people respect that. They don't laugh at the Tanakh who wrote that. They really don't. They recognize that it's something from God. Okay. Another aspect of Ben Gurion's personality, which helped him make tough decisions, was that he was able to always see the bigger picture. To continue the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, it starts out, Da me'ayin bata ul'ana taholach, and know where you're going. Now, in order to know where you're going, you need to know where you came from, because you have to know what the vision is. And he was really a man of vision. And now we're going to see a few examples which really proved how he was able to always look at the bigger picture. Okay, I love this story. I love all the stories. So Ben Gurion, he started out in Petach Tikva, and then eventually he moved to an area in Israel called Sedra. Parentheses, my favorite restaurant in the whole country is there. It's called Makom B'Sedra. It's a meat restaurant, Mehadrin. And what's so unique about the restaurant is the 80-year-old guy, he's the owner, and he makes the food, everything on the spot. There's nothing waiting. I went there a year ago with friends, and we literally see him walking out of the kitchen, going out to the garden in front of the restaurant, picking mint, carrots, whatever he needs. Most people don't know about it or go there because it's like in the Eastern Galilee, and it's not really next to anything, unless, if you're in Tveria, though, you should go there. People go to Dex, which is great, but you should go there too. Anyway, I'm bringing all this up because Ben Gurion, he spent time in a place called Sedra, and maybe it'll take us a few hours to get there. It took him a few days to get there, and when he got there, he said, wow, I finally feel like I'm in Eretz Yisrael, and he continued working the land. Now, a problem that people had back then, which actually still exists in Israel today, is not completely solved, is how do you protect your farms and your cattle and your sheep from people that steal it? Now, the Israeli army today is not, if let's say local Bedouins steal Israeli farmers' sheep, the Israeli army is not going to go help because that's not something the army deals with. So they have organizations which keep watch. And I know I did ILEAD for a few years, and we kept watch a bunch of times, like on people's farms. Now, they used to have Arabs, and then later the group of non-Jews from Cherkessia, it's a country in Europe, that would stand guard. But it wasn't good enough because they weren't Jewish, so they didn't feel the same care towards the land that the Jewish people would. And the turning point was one of the guards, a Cherkessian guard, he fell asleep, and then they realized, you know what, it's not exactly the best guard if you're falling asleep. You can't fall asleep during guard duty. So they ended up forming the first Jewish guard organization. It was called Bad Giora, and then eventually it was called HaShomer. And today in Israel, they have something called HaShomer Chadash, which is the same thing. Which there's always tons and tons of people volunteering for it that are going till today to help farmers watch the fields, watch the cattle. Now, Ben Gurion was really excited by this. And in order to be a guard, you need a gun. And then the people in charge, they go, you know, we don't really want you on the team because you're kind of a spacey guy, like dreaming, you're not always like so with it, and we don't really trust you with a gun. Ben Gurion, when he heard that, he was so insulted. Now, might I add, the guy that they don't want to give guard duty, they won't give him to a gun, is the man that becomes the first defense minister of Israel. Later on, when Israel's fighting its war, and even after he was not prime minister anymore, he died in 1973. Which is Yom Kippur war year. He lived for a very long time. People were constantly going to him for military advice because he was an expert, and we're going to talk about later how the guy who, no, you can't hold a gun, became such an expert. So it's just ironic. So anyway, that's part of Ben Gurion's history, and I just really like the story that they won't give him a gun. Okay, now a part that everyone loves. Everyone always loves hearing love stories of people's lives. Ben Gurion, after World War I, he was actually kicked out of Israel. Him and Yitzhak Ben-Zvi, who was the second president of Israel, they're kicked out because of their Zionist activities and told you can never come back. This is before the British are in charge. And he was heartbroken. What do you mean kicked out and can never come back to Israel? So he ends up in America. He said, okay, I might as well spend my time in America. And he tried to give speeches to get people to make Aliyah. And he would be giving speeches to nearly empty auditoriums. People weren't really there. And the turning point, and altogether, what he reports is about 150 Jews said, when the time is right, we'll move. No guarantees. And then a turning point was a book came out in which he was listed as one of the authors, where he spoke about his experiences guarding in Israel. And then he said, you know what, I want to write another book. And to help him do the research for his book, he had this woman who agreed to copy out sections from books that would help him, and then he would later use it and compile it all together. And this woman, her name was Paula, and she was a nurse, and she knew nothing. She wasn't connected to Zionism and love of Israel. Her family just wasn't like that, but she was exposed to the ideas because she was a nurse in a Jewish doctor's office, and in the doctor's office, she'd be exposed to these ideas. Anyway, Paula and Ben Gurion, they go out for about a year. He was 31, she was 25, and they get married. Now, here's the best part. They get married, they have a civil wedding in like town hall. And right after the ceremony, he leaves to go to a political meeting that he has. And then when he gets to the political meeting, he says, sorry, I'm late. He was 15 minutes late. And in his diary later that night, he writes, or the next day, he writes, I married a woman. Doesn't even write her name. And I think that start to their marriage really showed what their marriage would be look like. We said that the heading of all this is the bigger picture. Paula knew for the rest of her life that her marriage would always be second place, and Ben Gurion's political career and aspirations and goals would always be first place. And she accepted that. And she was really always second place. She's 4 months pregnant, and he goes to Canada because he wants to join the British Army, and he leaves his wife all alone and she's pregnant. And then eventually they move to Israel because one of the conditions of getting married was, Paula, you know, we're making Aliyah. And they're living in Israel. And then he says, you know what, let's go to Plansk, which is where he came from, and we'll go visit. And she never met Ben Gurion's family. So okay, nice trip to visit the Ben Gurion family. And then he leaves and he goes back to Israel, and she's there with her kids alone with her in-laws. Now, if I asked you, let's say you knew nothing, but I just said, would you rather go to Plansk or New York? What would you pick? You could tell by the name. And she grew up in New York. She knew what it was to live a modern life, and all of a sudden she's in Plansk and she was miserable. And then eventually he comes back for her and she goes back to Israel. But she spent many, many times where she was home alone and he was out traveling, doing things. And Ben Gurion really never knew what the financial situation in his house was. And they never had money. They were very, very, very poor. And later on, when he did start living at home, and he'd be out, so sometimes Paula would tell him, I'm having dinner with the kids, or she'd tell the kids, I'm having dinner with daddy, and she just wouldn't eat because she didn't have food. And that was really, really the situation. She was a true Eshet Chayil of a wife, because she always supported him and stayed with him. And part of his daily schedule when he was living in Tel Aviv is he'd have breakfast in the morning, and then he'd go out and do things, and then he'd come back and he'd sometimes take a nap. If someone wanted to interrupt her nap, even if they said it's a matter of emergency, she said no one is interrupting his nap. She literally pulled out a gun on them and said, and she was known as like his guard. No one is interrupting his nap. She died after they were married for 50 years, and he was heartbroken. He said, I did not deserve all the love that Paula, my wife, gave me. She gave me more love than I could ever imagine. And stay tuned. Next Monday, I'm doing another tour connected to Ben Gurion, a tour of Ben Gurion's desert home. The last years of his life he spent in Sde Boker, and I figured it was good. I mean, they're not necessarily connected, the two Zooms, but I figured it's a good idea to speak about his life. Not that you need it to understand his home, but the reason why I'm saying that right now is because there's a lot of nice Paula info, more details, juicy stuff that we'll learn next week for those of you that are able to join. So that has been Gurion and Paula's story. Okay. The next topic that I want to talk about, this is still referred to in the news today, and I don't know what I think when I think about it. It's a very upsetting kind of thing. I'll tell you now, and you guys will see how it makes you feel. When Israel became a state, well, even before, right after the UN declaration, Israel's in war. And the Arabs are fighting, and then all the surrounding countries attack, and Israel had a severe lack of weapons. They just did not have enough. Not to mention they didn't even know how to use them, because you have Holocaust survivors who don't even speak the same language. All of a sudden, here's a gunfight. And then about 10 days after Ben Gurion declared Israel to be a state, there was this ship coming from France known as the Altalena, with 940 passengers, but what was special about the ship, it had a huge amount of weapons. Now, think of how key this is. Israel has no weapon. Well, not no, but they had very few weapons. And now all of a sudden we have this ship coming. Except they didn't want Ben Gurion to know. What do you mean you don't want Ben Gurion to know? He's in charge of the whole country. Now, before Tzahal, before Tzava Haganah Lisa was established, you had all these little fighting groups. And one group called the Irgun, they were the ones that organized this ship. And they said, we want the weapons to come to us. And they said, okay, let's not tell Ben Gurion, because he's never going to let that happen. And they tried to keep it a secret, but how do you dock a ship of 940 people and weapons in secret? The secret didn't really work, and he found out. And he said, under no circumstances are the weapons on this trip going to the Irgun. They're going to all of us. And then the Irgun said, okay, let most of them come to us, and then some will come to you. He says, not most, some. We are one army, one country. We are not dividing weapons among different organizations. We're one army. And the Irgun said, no way. And the tough decision that Ben Gurion ended up making, he said, okay, if that's the case, we're going to sink the ship. And they sunk the ship. Could you imagine all those? Now, the people didn't like die with it. It wasn't that 940 people saying, thank God it wasn't the Titanic. There were Irgun soldiers and members of like other soldiers that were killed. So it wasn't like free of death. But could you imagine that the country is desperate for weapons and all the weapons are at the bottom of the sea? But that was a decision Ben Gurion said, no matter how hard it is for me to decide this, is it the right decision? I don't know, because we kind of have a civil war and people are dying from both sides. We need the weapons because it'll help save other lives. But he said, as a person of vision, looking at the bigger picture, we need one army. We have one government that's in charge. We can't start making exceptions. I'm putting my foot down. Now, was it the right decision? I don't know. Till today, who knows? And Ben Gurion, he is one of the most spoken about people in Israeli history, I'd say. I'm not going to say, and he's definitely recognized it for how great he was, but there's a lot of people that don't like him and say, well, he did this, he did that. I think no political figure is loved by everyone, but know that this is something in his life that is controversial. Until today, in the news, people will refer to it. So that's another cool thing to know. Of course, declaring the state of Israel was one of the greatest things Ben Gurion ever did. Even that wasn't simple. He had a meeting with his cabinet. He's sitting down with 10 other people. You know, Ben Gurion, the Americans say we should push off the declaration. We shouldn't really declare it right after the British leave. And now he has his entire cabinet that he needs to convince, no, the second the British leave, we are declaring the state of Israel. And that's what he did. And he was right. He said, this is our opportunity. We take it now. We declare the state of Israel. And thank God, because now we have the state of Israel. Jerusalem, if you remember when we saw in the Peel Commission that it was a different color, Jerusalem was supposed to be this international area. But Ben Gurion said, what do you mean? There's no international area. It's the capital of the Jewish people, right? We know. It's ours. Beit HaMikdash is built in Yerushalayim. It's our capital. And years later, he said this quote, which is so pertinent, especially for what's going on today in politics. So he says, Atidenu on moving it to Jerusalem, and it was moved to Jerusalem. He said, we're moving to Jerusalem. How the non-Jews react, screaming, you can't do that, you can't do that. And no one ended up really doing anything. They just made a lot of noise. And what makes the noise big in the news today is Yudan Shomron. Do we annex it? And I don't even like the word annex, because you can't annex something that already belongs to you. But in the political terms, do we add Yudan Shomron to Israel? Do we not? And then you have all these countries saying, you can't, we're going to boycott you if you do. Everyone's making a lot of noise. And if we take Ben Gurion's quote that he said from back then, it applies today. He says, our future is not dependent on what the non-Jews will say. They're all saying what they're going to do if we take this step. What is our future dependent on? It's dependent on what the Jews will do. So let us take that message. You know, we need to be people of action. And how do you become people of action, making decisions that, yes, this is what you're going to do? When you know your history. When you know, open the Tanakh, the whole Eretz Yisrael belongs to you, including Yudan Shomron. So it's a part. And Ben Gurion was able, because he was so well connected to his past and had a vision of the future, he was able to make these kinds of decisions. Okay. Oh, here is a very controversial topic. After the state of Israel was founded, we have the Independence Day War. And after the Independence Day War, well, it's really, like pausing for a second, the more I learn history, the more things I say, it's just crazy how many things I read in the news today that are so similar. You'll see the connection in a minute. That the country, after the Independence Day War, Ben Gurion says, I know millions of people are going to make Aliyah. I just know, because they're coming from Poland, from Germany, or now that we have the state and we're not limiting how many people come, millions of people are going to make Aliyah. And he starts investigating, learning, what do we need? How can we make the conditions the best possible? And tons of people came, and Israel was in a tremendous, tremendous economic crisis. People did not have food, for clothing, they didn't have money, they didn't have anything, and it was just getting worse and worse and worse. Now, how is that connected till today? So for those of you that follow Israeli news, I know I definitely do living here, and I also follow Netanyahu on Instagram. He says, people of Israel, I hear your cries, I'm giving you money. And I got a text, I texted my mom about it a few days ago. Guess what? I got a text that the Israeli government is giving more money. I know Trump gave the $1,200 check, so Israel gave also a little bit to people that are independent, that have their own businesses, and now they're giving a little bit more. But there's tons, if you follow the news, there's tons of people protesting that the government is not really taking care of them and that they have no ways to support their family. The unemployment rate during the height of Corona was, even though now it's like the height again, it was 25%, now it's 20%, where before Corona it was 4%. So a quarter of the country is unemployed, and people really are in very, very hard conditions, and they're screaming out to the government to help. So it's very similar situations. Anyway, what Ben Gurion decides how he could help the situation, he said, you know what? Germany, they owe us. They owe us big. And what he had is Germany paid the state of Israel what was known as reparations. Now, around like $8 billion to make up for not the lives that they murdered, because you can't pay for a life, but all the Jewish property that they stole. So he said, the Germans stole tons of property, and now they're paying us back for it. Now, that's a very controversial kind of decision, because people, especially since the Holocaust was a few years before, what do you mean? How could you accept money from the Germans? They murdered our families. How could you accept anything from them? They can't just pay their right out. So what's the right decision? I don't know. Now, it did help, because when he got this influx of money from Germany, it did help the country climb out of the economic downfall. So that's just something, another thing to know that started from Ben Gurion, and today people even could discuss, was it the right thing, wrong thing to do. Now, the last thing that I think contributed to Ben Gurion's ability to make really tough decisions is his openness to learning, and this really blows me away every time I hear about it. When Ben Gurion knew, it's such a long name to say, by the way, parentheses, his name was originally David Green, and he changed it to Ben Gurion because there was this fighter against the Roman in the time of the Jewish rebellion whose name was Yosef Ben Gurion, and after him, David named himself David Ben Gurion. So he didn't really know much about war, right? We said they don't want to give him a gun to stand guard duty. So he said, okay, but we're going to have the Independence Day, wasn't called an Independence Day war, but we're going to have a war for the fight of the existence of the Jewish people. So what do I need to do? I need to start learning. And he made a list of 14 different areas that he needed to know about. And he read, and he read, and he read, and he read, and he invited anyone he knew that could help him. And he asked, how many tanks do we have? How many guns do we have? How many soldiers do we have? How long does it take to get from here to here? 10 months he spent studying everything he knew and everything he got his hands on about war. And he called it the seminar. And the basis of this ended up becoming of everything he learned, the basis for the IDF. And because he invested so much time and effort into learning everything he could, he was great at his job of also being defense minister. And years later, people would still consult with him. He was 60 years old when he started this. 60-year-olds, we talk about people when they get older, they're set in their ways. They're mostly set in their ways. What now? You're going to bother me to learn a whole topic? I don't know about defense. You know about defense, you be in charge of defense. But Ben Gurion's approach was, no, I don't know about defense. So what? So let me learn about defense. And that's what he did. He was never too old to learn something new. He had, I'm not exaggerating, 20,000 books in his bookcase. He would say, I don't understand why people just go out for coffee. Why would you waste your time? We could sit for coffee for hours. He loved reading. He knew many languages because he said, what, I'm going to read a Greek book translated into Hebrew? No, I need to read it in Greek. So he learned Greek, and he wanted to read books written in Latin. So he learned Latin. He actually knew Hebrew from Poland because his grandpa taught it to him, and he spoke fluent Hebrew from a young age. And he was constantly educating himself, learning new things. Okay, another topic, which I did not know how it came about, but this is really a very hot topic today, and it started from the time of Ben Gurion. In Israel today, there is a debate, and a lot of times you see Haredim protesting, and I know I experience it sometimes. I want to go on the bus, or I'm on a bus, and there's so much traffic. I'm like, why is there so much traffic? It's because the Haredim are protesting because they don't want to be drafted into the Israeli army, so they block the streets. What's the deal? Today, according to Israeli law, if you are learning in yeshiva, you do not need to go to the army. Now, the people that are the most upset are Chiloni, that aren't going to be learning in yeshiva because they're not religious, and they serve 3 years, and they say, what do you mean? We put our lives on the line and you sit and learn? And then you have people that do something in the middle, mostly dati leumi, where they learn in yeshiva and they serve in the army at the same time because they say we value Torah, but we also value fighting. How did this whole thing happen? How did it start? Why could some people not serve in the army and some people do? So the way it started was there were a small group of learning people that went to Ben Gurion and said, we just experienced the Holocaust. All our yeshivot, and the great yeshivot in Europe that really just got destroyed, they're all destroyed, all our sentence of learning. Please, we want to learn Torah. Now, Ben Gurion, being as connected as he was to the Tanakh and to a sense of Jewish history, Jewish identity, said, of course. Now, 10 years later, there's thousands of people learning. And he says, when this group of boys asked me 10 years ago if they could learn Torah and be exempt from the army, and I said yes. It was in light of the fact that the yeshivot were destroyed, and I value Talmud Torah. I had no idea it would turn into the thousands. And he wrote a letter to the chief rabbi of Israel and said, we need to stop this. We can't exempt people from serving the army. It's not fair. Why should some people serve and other people shouldn't? And he said, okay, we'll let them join service for 3 months and then we'll take it up from there. And then there was a big pushback. No, we can't. And things were just left as they were until today. It was started from the time of Ben Gurion, and it's constantly an issue in the Knesset, always, especially around the time of elections when everyone's trying to get supporters. So the religious people say, well, we'll support you if you make sure we don't need to join the army. It's still something that's discussed, and it was started from Ben Gurion's time. Now, I really love the reason why he started it, because I really appreciate it. Yes, the yeshivot were destroyed. Learning Torah is extremely valuable, but he said, but to a point. So that's a topic from back then. This is, I think, this is the second to last story that I want to share with you. Maybe some of you are familiar with this picture. It's really, really famous. Ben Gurion standing on his head. He's at a beach in Herzliya, and he's standing on his head. Why? When he was 71 years old, he learned to stand on his head. Now, I want to ask you how many people, I don't know how old your parents are, but let's say your parents that are or grandparents. I would not, my grandma lived in 71, but even when she was 71, I would not tell her, your grandma, try standing on your head. What do you mean? You're scared. What if they break something? You don't just tell them to stand on their head. He learned to stand on his head at the age of 71. Why? Because we mentioned earlier that he was a sickly kind of person, and he would get these headaches. And one of his neighbors who was a doctor said, I recommend 2 things for you. One is you should go on walks. And 2, try standing on your head. It might help. And he literally learned to stand on his head. Now, the reason why I like this so much is because I think this whole picture of him is so representative of who he was as a prime minister, as a person. In order to be an effective decision maker, an effective ruler, prime minister, you need to be able to look at things from different angles. You need to be able to look at things from close up, from upside down, the big picture, the small picture. And Ben Gurion was a man that was able to do all of that. And when you stand on your head, you see things a little bit differently. And Ben Gurion was able to see things differently than other people. He was able to say, what do you mean? I don't care if America doesn't want us to declare the state. We need to declare the state now. And I think this is really reflective of how he was able to see things in ways that other people weren't. The last thing I want to share with you is a picture of Ben Gurion's grave. So please join me next week because I will be mentioning it even more. He's buried with his wife in Sde, which is down south in the middle of nowhere. Literally the middle of nowhere, but gorgeous. And this is his grave. It's very simple. And there's 3 dates on it. The date he was born in 1886, the year he died in 1973, and the year he made Aliyah, 1906. Because for him, that was what was important. He made Aliyah to Eretz Israel. And I mentioned earlier that he said that was the happiest day of his entire life, the day that he moved to Israel. And he was not moving to the Israel that I moved to. I moved to Israel. I had literally a red carpet rolled down in front of me, a band, friends. He was not moving to that. But being the aware person of history and identity, he moved to Eretz Israel. He didn't care what he found there. It was more than enough for him. So I want to just summarize about the things that we spoke about. So we opened with his childhood, which we said was unremarkable, and nothing in his childhood would point to the first prime minister and decision maker that he became. We said there were 3 things that contributed to his being able to make such tough decisions. One was his sense of history and identity. He appreciated and loved what Theodor Herzl believed in, and he was heartbroken when he died. He made Aliyah at the age of 20. He suffered from malaria. He was very hungry. And he, another thing I wanted to add, eventually, so remember I said that Ben Gurion was not, like, they didn't want to make him the guard. Now, he worked the land, but he wasn't really so great at it either. And there's a story that once he took donkeys to a field to do whatever they needed, and he brought a newspaper and he read the newspaper and the donkeys got lost. And he said about himself, I believe in working the land, but I'm not the best person to do it. And eventually he got involved in politics, partially because of his amazing Hebrew, because they wanted someone with such good Hebrew. And it was also a better way to serve him. And I think that's also an important message, because there are so many jobs out there and so many different talents. And imagine you take someone like him and make him work a field. He's not right for working a field. He's right for leading a country. So it's also important with the children to push, to encourage them to do what's great for them and where they belong. And the reason why I was reminded of that now is because when he was in Jerusalem and working for the Jewish Agency, which was basically the government of the time, he writes that he rented a dark room in a basement, and he rented it with a friend, and they would take turns sleeping on the bed, and he didn't have food. And when I think about that, I'm like, wow, these were the people of then. This is the man that becomes the prime minister of Israel, and how he's so dedicated and giving to his cause and what he believes in, that he's living in such dire conditions. We spoke about the Peel Commission, how Ben Gurion was proud to take out the Tanakh and say, this is what gives us the right to Eretz Yisrael. We spoke about his ability to see the bigger picture, how he declared the state of Israel, even though others said, no, wait. We spoke about his marriage, which always was second seat to political affairs. We spoke about the Altalena Affair, the ship that he said sink because we need unity. We spoke about reparations from Germany, his openness to learning, the seminar where he spent 10 months learning everything he could about Eretz Yisrael, about the way the army works. And we ended with his headstand, and you see the picture on the right. I haven't actually seen it. It's on the beach. I don't know specifically which coast it's in. It says Tel Aviv on his bathing suit, so I assume it's in Tel Aviv. We see a fun statue of Ben Gurion standing on his head. And it just reminds me of how Israel, how much history and meaning it has everywhere you go. Because imagine you're a mom, you take your kids to the beach, and you see this statue of someone standing on your head. What do your kids want to do? One, they're going to want to climb on it. They're going to want to take a picture with it and say, Mommy, what is that? And then you're going to explain about Ben Gurion and the kind of leader he was, and how a simple trip to the beach all of a sudden has so much meaning, and giving your kids a sense of history. I want to end with two tasks for you. One, we opened up with the airport. We said, Ben Gurion Airport, you guys speak about it all the time when you come on trips to Israel. I hope, God willing, you'll be able to come to this airport soon. And I want to ask you, what will you tell your children or yourselves or your spouses about Ben Gurion the next time you land in the airport? And two, we said Ben Gurion had such a strong sense of identity in his letter about when Theodor Herzl died, when he spoke in front of the Peel Commission, and everything that he did. What step will you take to help you build your identity? I want to thank you all for joining. This was so exciting for me. If anyone has any questions, I'm more than happy to answer. And next week, we're going to be talking about, we're going to take a virtual tour of Ben Gurion's desert home. So if he interested you, just wait till you see what his house looked like. There's plenty of fascinating surprises over there. Thank you all for joining. Have an amazing rest of the day. And it looks sunny out from the so enjoy the sun.